Morning, all. I'm Kevin Cordred with the CF Buckeye Wing. Is anybody complaining about the weather? Raise your hand, right? Kind of do that. We kind of got lucked out on this, but we're super excited to be here, and we're going to hopefully answer the question, why would anybody fly all the way from Ohio or drive up here to come up here for the segment? And we're going to kind of talk through that here in a little bit. So we'll start off with some introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about the airplane. We're going to talk about its history with women's air service pilots. And we're going to talk about a lot of the people development we're actually doing within the CAF. So I want to thank the EAA, Warbirds in Review. I want to thank the Commemorative Air Force for helping us to get here. I want to also recognize Kyle, who I'm surprised, she's on our last segment. I'm surprised the poor thing is about ready to fall over. I also want to thank Scotts. Scotts actually maintains our grass runway down in Union County. It's so nice, it gets mistaken for a golf fairway. There we go. We'll wait till he go ahead and clears the runway, and then we'll get going. So we're gonna start out with some introductions, and we're gonna start actually with Dave Holden, who's all the way on the end here, then Danielle Reese, then Jen Solinger, and I'll do a little introduction. We'll have a nice little round table. We're actually gonna have some question and answer segment at the end, and when we get through everything. So, Dave, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm David Holden. We maintain the PT-26 down in Marysville, Ohio, and I'm a pilot for JetBlue.
I'm Danielle Reese, a 30-year veteran of the Army who found aviation very late in life, which brought me eventually to the Commemorative Air Force. I do education and history for the Buckeye Wing.
And I'm John Solinger. I fly for a major airline for the day job, and I've had the privilege of being the operations officer of our CF Wing and Buckeye Wing in Marysville, Ohio.
And as I said, I'm Kevin Cordred. I'm with the CAF. My day job is I'm an IT guy, right? I work for Accenture, so I'm the luckiest person here at Oshkosh because I get to fly that. And we can talk a little bit about the path to do that here in a little bit. So we're going to start right in and actually talk about the airplanes. So Dave is actually co-owner of a FBO and maintenance shop at Union County, and he started working on these, and he had some Warbird experience replacing, fuel pump on a Corsair and whatnot. But Dave, talk about the history of that airplane, and then we'll talk about we got a maintenance question we'll do.
Yeah, so this PT-26 was actually built in Hagerstown, Maryland by Fairchild, as opposed to most of the PTs were built by Fleet in Canada. And a little bit of the history of this airplane, it actually landed in Columbus, Ohio, on its way out to Canada when it was delivered to the Royal Canadian Air Force. And we believe that this is one of the lowest hour PTs. It has under 700 hours total time.
And so you work on Moonies and you work on Bananas, work on Cessnas and whatnot. So you're given this time machine. It's like, what's unique about it from a maintenance and repair and all that experience?
Well, the most unique thing about this PT is the wood wing. The whole carry through, the spars, everything is wood. It's quarter-inch plywood skins. So we take great care inspecting it with borescope cameras to look for delamination because it is 81 years old at this point.
And there's not a lot of people that know wood composition and whatnot. It is kind of unique. By the way, you couldn't get a piano or a chest of drawers in World War II in Maryland because they shut down all the factories and directed all the output to make Fairchild trainers. So it's kind of hard to get a piano in World War II because all the wood production went to making these. So, okay, Danielle, tell us a little bit about this airplane actually coming to our hometown Christmas Eve, 1944.
This is such an amazing story. The Women Air Force Service pilots, their first mission when they were formed was to deliver aircraft from factories to training sites and ports of embarkation around the country. The Newcastle Army Air Base was effectively right next door to the Fairchild factory. So the 2nd Ferrying Group of Newcastle ferried the PTs and all its variants across the country. This particular model was built about October of 43, we think, and it was ferried by the 2nd Ferrying Group through our hometown at Columbus, and it spent Christmas Eve, 1943, in our hometown at the Lockbourne Army Airfield. From there, it went on 3 more days of travel, 1,170 miles to get to Winnipeg, Manitoba. So this aircraft came through our hometown, was ferried by women Air Force service pilots, we believe, and is a lot of connections to our hometown and our aircraft. The route we flew to get here this weekend was that same route that this airplane flew 81 years ago.
So if anybody wants to complain about flying in the winter, what about taking that in Ohio December? You better wear about 5 pairs of socks from the looks of it. But, this airplane does have a big heritage as a mark in training women's air service pilots. So, like, one of my mentors I'll talk a little bit more about was Bee Haidu, right? She was a WASP. She passed away a couple years ago I think she was like 101. But she offered up some really, really good steer about flying this plane. And now we're going to have John talk a little bit about flying it. So, John, you fly a lot of stuff. You got your own airplane and whatnot. So you're confronted with this, and it's kind of like, what do you do? What's unique about it, and what's kind of the same maybe with other airplanes?
So I look at this airplane, and PT stands for primary trainer. People who haven't flown anything before get into this for the very first time. So it's designed to be very forgiving. So we already saw in the video that the wide landing gear will help with directional controls. We saw a little bit of a comment about, new pilots learning to flare. Sometimes they flare late and maybe bounce, and sometimes they flare too early and maybe drop the airplane in. The landing gear is very forgiving in those instances. And what's unique about the airplane is the degree in that it is forgiving, okay? Mm-hmm. So in another airplane, you might wind up with, an incident or something, but this airplane, to that degree, is really, really forgiving. The other thing about this airplane, the controls are well balanced and are all controlled by push rods. So that means there's really not a whole lot of play in the controls, and it flies very, very well. Extraordinarily well. I would say it's probably one of the better flying aircraft that I've flown. And then I guess another thing I would say is we did mention about the 200 horsepower engine on the airplane. And so it's a big, heavy airplane. We think it'd have lots of power with the 200 horses, but really not so much. And as a pilot, you have to keep that in mind. You have to keep in mind that your climb rate really won't be that great. You have to plan ahead a little bit if you do have to go around. This airplane really won't climb very well, if at all, if you have the flaps extended. So some things to learn about that. I love the airplane. It's a great trainer, and I wish everybody had a chance to fly it.
So we're going to shift over to Dave and actually have a maintenance question. By the way, does anyone know how you can tell if an airplane is a Warbird? It doesn't have cup holders, right? So if you look and you got cup holders, probably not a Warbird, right? So this doesn't have cup holders. Actually, R.T. Dixon, that flies Swamp Fox, we mentioned this. He goes, Kev, I was going to put a cup holder in the P-51, but after we talked, I'm not going to put one in because that would not make it a Warbird anymore. So, Dave, you had to repair a cylinder on this that let go, and it was kind of an interesting adventure to go out. It was kind of like a Raiders of the Lost Ark episode, right, or movie, to find the parts and actually change it. And then it was like, what's the documentation like, to work on these things?
Well, one thing that's a really good resource is the 26 of these units that the CAF has. There's a lot of great resources, and folks have been working on these for years. So we tapped into that. Air Corps Library is another great resource for all the manuals. And we were fortunate that we found 6 overhauled cylinders from a gentleman out in California, and he wouldn't even ship them to us. He said, I'll drive them to you. We learned, John and I took the cylinders off and replaced them, and it's been running great ever since.
Well, I love the story about how we got the cylinders, because I was out there, our daughter was going to grad school at Cal State Long Beach, and I went out to see this fella, and he goes, where's Marysville, Ohio? I said, well, it's northwest of Columbus. He goes, is that near Dayton? I was like, no, it's not near Dayton. So the way he got from California to Ohio was one of those 1982 Rand McNally atlases. He didn't even have a GPS. He got it out, and he's looking at Kev, do I go this way, right? So he made it, right? He dropped off all the cylinders, and we got things going. So, but it was unique experience when, Dave, you have a lot of high technology stuff. Is there anything in here like kind of low tech that's kind of curious, like maybe like the concept of a wobble pump? I always love that. So talk about that. What's kind of like a surprise?
Yeah, so if we lose the mechanical fuel pump on the back of the engine, there is a wobble pump. So it's a hand pump that you can pump to keep the engine running. So we keep close eye on that fuel pressure when we're flying it.
Absolutely. One of my British colleagues down with Air Base Georgia in Atlanta, John, used to fly he was a maintenance fellow for British Airways. And he said when he first started working on Warbirds, everyone here know what a mag drop is? Mag drop, like change the mags, kind of like do that. He thought you actually dropped the magneto, and that like got all the rust off of it and made it like work better. So yeah, but John learned a lot. He does a lot of great stuff with PTs and whatnot. So Danielle, one of my all-time heroes is B. Haidu, right? And B was a WASP, and we had a lot of great conversations. She flew PT-19s, and I said, "Hey B, give me a couple of tips about flying that," right? And she says, "Hold the stick like you're holding a bird, because this has control rods. You don't want to drink a lot of Pete's coffee before you go fly this thing, right? Because you're like all over the sky." But the other thing she told me was, don't be like Ben Affleck in Pearl Harbor, like doing this with like the P-40. She said, you'll tear the wings off, Kev, so don't do that. But Danielle, why don't you talk about some of your research efforts to like find, a bit of the history around like the Women's Air Service pilots from Ohio?
So the Women Air Force Service Pilots, the WASP, is a merger of two earlier programs. If you were here for the uniform program ahead of this, you heard that there were the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron and then the Women's Flight Training Detachment. Those were merged in late '43 to make the Women's Air Force Service Pilots. There were 25,000 women applied to that program. 1,800 were accepted into training, and only 1,074 graduated. The graduation rate was a little higher than the men's courses because the women all had to be pilots already. Towards the end of the course, they had to have a pilot's license and over 35 hours of flight time before they could even apply for the program. Even so, 25,000 women applied, only 18 were allowed in, 1,074 graduated, 38 died in training or in service for the little over 2 years of that program. The remainder were discharged in December of '44 as civilian employees of the government. They were not veterans. So there was no veterans benefits, no GI Bill, no life insurance, no health insurance, nothing. The whole program for them was self-funded. It wasn't until 1977 that they finally earned veteran status. So a number of the women died before they earned veteran status. And so in cooperation with the 99's, Women's Aviation International, and a few other agencies, we go around and find as many of their grave sites as we can. There are 24 buried in Ohio, and every year between the 99's, the Scioto Valley chapter of the 99's, and the Buckeye Wing, we travel about 2,000 miles visiting every one of those cemeteries, identifying those graves, giving them the military honors they deserve. So it's very, very important for us to continue that heritage and to respect and present the legacy that they put up for us.
Great, thanks Danielle. Absolutely wonderful research effort. And you're going to like all parts of Ohio trying to find these graves. We talked about one in Youngstown yesterday and whatnot. I think it's just, so within the CAF and, EA Warbirds is the same way. I joined the CAF in 1998 and I came for the airplanes. Ooh, look at the Dauntless, right? Look at the Mustang. I actually wound up staying for the people. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. In fact, I want John to talk a little bit about maybe one of the biggest like surprises or, kind of like things that he noticed. So General Chuck McGee, who passed away, I think about a year and a half ago, Chuck was one of my mentors. And he started out flying PT-19s down in Atlanta before he moved up and then went to P-51s in Italy and whatnot. And I said, hey, Chuck, give me a couple tips, right? First tip was, he said, Kevin, the airplane doesn't know who's flying it. He says, it doesn't matter what it is. You got to know every nut and bolt on this thing. I don't care whether it's a PT or a Mustang. And I was like, okay, Chuck, that's some pretty good advice. I said, what's the second point? He goes, you got to get out of Columbus, Ohio, because it's the coldest place on earth. And he was from Alabama, right? He asked me how many snow blowers I had in the garage. So, but yeah, I miss Chuck a lot, right? He was a real good mentor. So, John, when you first started flying this thing, like you and Dave flown all sorts of stuff, right? So was there anything that jumped out at you that's kind of unique that you tell
Yeah, actually,
students?
there's two things.
Two things.
First things, open the window on takeoff and landing, right? How often do you get to do that, right?
Yep.
And the reason
Yep.
for that is your escape method if anything should go wrong, okay? So the canopies remain open for takeoff and landing. And then the other thing, too, is slipping the airplane. It really has two characteristics. If you slip the airplane in a very shallow slip, it kind of behaves like a normal airplane. You steepen up the slip a little bit, and it tends to tuck the nose on you a little bit. So those are two characteristics that we kind of learned and kind of go with that a little bit. So yeah, those right off the bat, top of my head, those are the two things I can think of.
So maybe one other thing, and I remember you and Dave pointing this out. So I'm conditioned to do like full flap landings in the PT, and they're not really flaps, they're like spoilers. And I'm doing like these Stuka approaches, right, to go land on the runway. But talk a little bit about the flaps and the importance of them, because I think that's kind of unique.
Okay, so the flaps, first of all, they have a flap extension speed of 95 miles an hour, okay? Beyond, if you're higher than that, you do risk damaging some structural damage to the flaps. And there's, a mid position and then a full position. In the full position, like you said, Kevin, it's really kind of a very steep approach and it requires a little bit more accuracy in flaring out, rounding out, and landing. So if you read the manuals, it says experienced pilots should be the ones using full flaps. I think with just a little practice, it's really not that much of an issue. The other thing is with just one notch of flaps, it kind of glides what I would say like a typical airplane, all right? Maybe a little steeper glide angle. And then with no flaps, it's actually a pretty good glider. You get a nice glide rate with the flaps up. So what I find unique about that is the difference in glide angle with the different positions of the flaps. And you do really notice that in this airplane.
No, that's helpful, right? Because all these airplanes that they were put together before there was the FAA, the NTSB, manufacturing standards and whatnot. What I heard is when they ship these, they actually put an extra set of wings in the container because they figured the students were so bad they would tear up the wings anyway. So let's just ship a spare set, right? I think a couple things, right? I've got 140 hours flying PTs, and I always say it's not 140 hours. It's 1 hour 140 times because you always pick up something new. But I remember the first time, because I was flying the Air Base Georgia PT down there that's actually got a Tuskegee heritage. And the first time I pulled the canopy back, I was like, this is for me, right? It just felt so neat. Who's coming over? Oh, there we go, nice B-25. Okay, so Dave, we're going to go like one more kind of maintenance item, and then we'll talk about people and have some Q&A and stuff. What is the thing that you, from a maintenance perspective, you find the most vexing about this? Or it's kind of like, I wish this was like a Mooney or like a modern plane.
Well, it comes down to the Ranger engine because there's just not a lot of parts available. We were down for 6 weeks just to get the fuel pump repaired.
Yep.
There's just a lack of parts for these airplanes out there. And unlike a lot of the other Warbirds that fly under the experimental exhibition, this is a certified airplane. It's the M62. So it has a type certificate data sheet. We have to follow the airworthiness directives. So it kind of ties our hands a little bit where we could use different equipment.
Great. Danielle, so we were talking in the car on the way up from Ohio, and we were kind of comparing notes, right? And this is going to lead in a topic about how it's so important to preserve the organic domain knowledge about like flying airplanes like this, because all that knowledge, it doesn't show up on the internet. It's not in a manual, right? So it's something that we strive quite strongly to kind of preserve. But what are, because Danielle, you've flown all sorts of stuff, helicopters, so Danielle can like pat her stomach and her head at the same time, right? She's a qualified helicopter pilot. So what struck you about this? You're kind of like, oh, that's neat.
So very few of us get to fly these vintage Warbird airplanes. This is an incredibly special opportunity and a privilege. I have been very blessed in my life to fly a lot of different kinds of things. So helicopters, ultralights, home built, some old vintage planes, powered parachutes, all the different things. This is different. than any other aircraft I've flown. Like remarkably different in its feel, just the way it feels. If I could compare it to anything, it would be like a helicopter. Kevin calls it patting your head and rubbing your belly. Like there's a lot going on in a helicopter. But a helicopter is very pressure sensitive to all the things you do in that machine. It's about balance and feel and pressure sensitivity and anticipating how it's going to move. And it's kind of like, it's like a dance with the machine where you're feeling it. This is the only other airplane I've flown, only other machine I've flown that feels that way. It listens to you, you feel it, it's gentle. When Kevin talked about hold it like a little bird, hold it like a little bird. It doesn't take much, but it is so responsive too. It is an absolute joy to fly this machine.
Great, thanks Danielle. So John, you've taken this thing kind of all over. We've done some wonderful cross countries. In a PT, you take a big bottle of iced tea, by the way, because it's hot, and it only cruises at like 90 miles an hour. But what was your favorite kind of long distance cross country thing that you've done so far?
Well, hands down, coming to Oshkosh, of course.
Oshkosh, yeah, there we go. That's an easy
Of
question.
course, yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
And
So-
what was it like? Because you had to like do fuel stops, right? And
Yeah,
how many
so,
of those?
so, you know, doing a 2-hour leg is probably a good thing in this airplane, and it gives you just a chance to stretch your legs and top off and kind of consider the next thing. With this particular airplane, it's very important to remain a VFR and not fly in the rain. So stopping every 200 miles or every 2 hours allows you a chance to kind of check the weather and make sure your plan is sticking together however you decide to
And
do
what
that.
happens, and you and Dave can talk about this, what happens with rain and that lovely wooden prop?
So we have some protection on it because we have a leading edge, metal strip on it. But however, the prop will eventually delaminate. So flying in rain is generally a bad idea in wooden propellers.
So I'm a digital guy by trade, right? I mean, that's all I do during the week, and this is kind of like my analog time. So one maintenance thing I want Dave to comment on, I'm going to kind of demonstrate this really quick. So back in the day, right, to tighten up this propeller nut, you had to put a bar through here. And then you had, what was it, somebody that weighed 150 pounds? Or so.
The torque value is a 5-foot bar and a
5-foot bar.
180-pound man.
Yeah.
That's the torque value.
And like trying to explain that to somebody, right? It's kind of like, okay, you got your electronic torque wrench and all. No. It's a 150-pound person on a bar, and like that does it. So, but it is kind of full of surprises. So I really regret, due to my day job, I wasn't here for the Bud Anderson Memorial with Connie and everybody, because I did an event with Bud down in Atlanta. And I asked Bud the same question I asked Chuck and everybody else. I said, talk to me about this, because he flew PT-26s. He didn't fly PT-19s. And he said, Kev, you got to treat every plane like it's a P-51, right? Because you still have the fundamentals of altitude and speed and whatnot. Like it almost doesn't even matter. The other thing, and this is, I've never mentioned this to a lot of people before. I have actually a secret item about Bud Anderson. He was a tremendous PowerPoint expert. He would quiz me, right? So I would talk about, Chuck, what's the difference between the B models and the D models? And he goes, yeah, they kind of flew the same, more guns than the D. But Kev, did I show you how I put videos in a PowerPoint, right? He was just a fountain of knowledge. I wanted to take him on a consulting engagement. And he was like, yeah, I'm ready to go. Just call me up, right? And at that moment, I kind of figured, there's a lot of great narrative around the airplanes. There's even more narrative and work to have around developing the people, right? And one example, Matt, I want you to raise your hand, Matt Chen, right? As Hank, our CEO of CAF mentioned yesterday, we're really developing the next generation, not only of pilots, but also crews, maintenance people, and whatnot, right? And that's so important because a lot of the stuff isn't written down. And so Danielle is also part of that, because Danielle, you're about ready to get checked off, right, and be flying this. So one point around the people I'll mention is kind of funny. So there were 2 young women from Ohio State University Aviation program, Sophie and Sarah. I think they'll probably join the CAF and start flying this, but they're busy with school. They're busy getting their CFIs and whatnot. And they asked me, we put them in the plane. They said, well, where's the GPS, right? Where's like the G1000? And I said, well, here it is. Here's your GPS, right? It was the phone. And then we started talking about the flaps and how critical they are for, air speeds and landing. And they said, well, where's the flap switch? No flap switch. Well, where's the nice big lever, like in the Piper Arrows you pull up? Don't have that, right? And so there's a little lever on the floor. You literally have to reach down like this. This is why I go to yoga once a week, just to fly this thing, right? It's kind of like, you gotta pick it up. And it was so interesting just to kind of watch their reactions of going from a highly digital world to something analog. And so and we'll move to the Q&A here. I got maybe a couple other things to say around people development. But Dave, how does flying the PT, how does that make you feel when you fly?
My favorite time to fly this airplane is in the evening, just before sunset. There's no wind. And we have a fantastic runway out there in Marysville. And this airplane is consistently the best landing airplane I've ever flown. There are times you land, and it's not me, it's the airplane for sure, that you're not quite sure if the mains are on yet. So it's magical.
Danielle, how about you? You're about ready to get checked off, and you're kind of absorbing and drinking from the fire hose around like the PT. How does it make you feel?
I mentioned that this is a blissful experience to fly this machine. It is so comfortable, it's so interesting, so engaged and visceral. But I'm struck by the weighty sense of responsibility. There's only 75 of these left flying. This one has some of the lowest hours of any of them that are flying. This is an incredibly precious piece of history. It's a very precious artifact to me, to the organization, to the world. So flying this, as joyful as it is, as much joy as that brings me, it also brings a sense of responsibility to fly it well, to protect it, preserve it, and demonstrate it with the respect and honor that it deserves to carry on this legacy. So it's both satisfying, but also it's important. It's more than just fun.
John, how about you? Because you and Dave fly, high-tech airliners, and you got your own aircraft and RVs and the Baron and whatnot. How does this make you feel?
So I would say the best compliment I can give this airplane is I really like flying it. And the more I fly it, the more I like it. How often does that happen, right? The more you do something, the more you like it. And it's just been kind of a really wonderful experience so far.
I'm going to actually kind of follow that along here a little bit. When I think for me, how this makes me feel is when I go do solo cross countries, right? And you're just kind of going up to like Akron from Columbus or go up to Lorraine. And I try and go, like Dave says, either in the morning or like early evening, because it's just like magic, right? It's just beautiful views. It's just you out there. And, frankly, some of the time, I think B and Chuck and now Bud are like sitting in the back seat when I'm doing the solo, right? It's just kind of nice to be, understand the people side of this. But that's the thing we're really, really keen on. So anybody here seen the Hobbit movies, right? Peter Jackson and like all that. Okay, so I was talking to Tom Martin, one of our members, and he's got a buddy, Fred Murren, that actually works in New Zealand with Peter Jackson. We'll wait for, there goes somebody. Okay, great. And they're down there restoring Fokker triplanes. And it's interesting because Fred had an opportunity to talk to World War I pilots. And he said, I had a lot of time talking to pilots, but I really should have been talking to the mechanics. Because those are the folks that have the craftsmanship to help keep these things going. Now, technology being what it is, probably maybe in my lifetime, maybe afterwards, we're going to be able to laser print a P-51, right? We're going to be able to remanufacture it. There's no more Rolls-Royce engine cores left, right? So we got to do something about that. But maybe we put a PT-6 turbine in them or something. But still, technology, has actually helped out all the Warbird community. But the one thing it hasn't done is captured all the domain knowledge, right, from like all the people that like had the experience flying these things. So I'm going to kind of end at least our narrative, and then we'll go to Q&A. I have a fella, one of the founding members of the Air Base Georgia. He's Vic. He was a reconnaissance Spitfire and Mosquito pilot, and I was at one of the Christmas dinners, and I said, Vic, give me a flying tip, okay? You've flown just about everything and whatnot. And he goes, always keep your throttle locked tight. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah. He says, I knew this guy, right? He was on holiday. And he went to an OTU unit, and he picked up a Spitfire 2. He was going to go fly it around. And he didn't tighten down the throttle friction screw. And if you know anything about Spitfires, right, the throttle and everything just like comes back. I was lucky enough to fly one of the Monk family Spitfires over in the UK a couple years back. And you just have to be super careful. And he goes, this guy had the throttle and everything come back on him, and he actually put it between two trees and tore the wings off. And, Spitfire goes out the door, it's on the side. And they actually had to dig him out. And I said, Vic, you sure know a lot about this, right? You got a lot of details. He goes, Kevin, always keep your throttle friction lock there. So, even in 172s, I kind of like give it a little extra twist for Vic. So anyway, that actually concludes our kind of like formal narrative. We've got some walkers around with mics. No math problems, please. Okay, I haven't had enough coffee yet. But let's go ahead and have some great questions.
I have about 110 hours in the PT, and it's a wonderful plane. The only vice is the Fisk approach controllers always call it a chipmunk. But when we landed, or when we would fly this, the only real problem we had was the tail wheel. It was always the Achilles heel, so we always tried to have tail low wheel landings, which worked well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Have you solved that problem in your wing?
And anybody who does should be nominated for the Nobel Prize for Physics, by the way, because this is actually a physics problem. Dave, you want to comment on that for the...
Yeah, I just try to block that out because that is the bane of my existence with this airplane, yeah. But we took the tail wheel all apart this year, cleaned it, we did some modifications to it, and so far, knock on wood, it's working well. But we had a lot of shimmy last year, for sure.
It can get to the point where the whole, and I've had this down in Georgia, where the whole instrument panel shakes, right? And you can't even see the instruments. You go, okay, this is bad. Probably the number one remedy for this, because there's some folks thinking about having a lockable tail wheel and all that. The easiest way to get by tail wheel shimmy in this airplane is to land on the grass, right? Because it just sighs. It kind of goes, and just lands. So that's a really great question. That is a functional design flaw in this airplane. So if you get a chance tonight, go out to YouTube, look up World War II acrobatic training, right? They got, I'll say kids, probably about 19, 20, and they're out doing acrobatics, but they're all taking off dirt squares. There's no runway, right? So that's a little bit of a modern problem with the PTs. So other questions?
Yeah, my name is Christian. Thank you for the presentation and everything that you guys do to preserve these aircraft. So I'm a pilot and an Air Force veteran, and I was wondering how I could get involved in the CAF. And I'm more based out of the Waukesha, Wisconsin area, but was curious to learn more.
You want me to take that one? Okay. So 1998, I'm at this event in Atlanta, and my wife says they had the B-17 there and like everything else, and she goes, if you don't join the CAF, or it would be EA Warbirds or what have you, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life. And thanks to her, she got me going, right? So I would say hit commemorativeairforce.org. You can join. They have, it's an absolutely horrific, like $24 a month, right? And there's just so many benefits. And again, it's the people, right? So if anybody wants to have an exercise or weight loss program, go work on Warbirds in July in Houston. So it's a great way, right? You just sweat all the bad stuff out of you. But best thing is to hit a website, find a unit near you, and then you'll start to develop the network, right? And actually, one advantage, if anyone here has any experience in Spitfires? Raise your hand if you do. Maybe, maybe not. So my daughter was going to school over in the UK, and I wanted to go fly, right, the MJ627 over at Biggin. And I called up one of our members over there who was actually in the UK, and I said, Alex, I'd love to go out and do this. And he's like, let me call somebody. So 10 minutes later, he calls me back. He goes, be at Biggin Hill Saturday at 10 a.m. I was like, okay, that's a benefit, right, being able to do that. But yeah, it's a wonderful organization. I think Hank said we got like 175 aircraft now. But when you join, the best thing about it is, be enamored of the planes and the machinery and the analog nature of it. But the people is actually the best part. So that's a really, really great question. Other questions, comments, reactions?
Yeah, hi. I'm a student at Ohio State University, as well as Sarah. We're Sarah and Sophia.
How's it going?
We toured down in Marysville and saw the PT and honestly fell in love with it. We've only heard good things from Danny, Kevin, Christine back home. And I wanted to ask Danny, how did you get involved with the Wasps and how did they kind of capture your heart? Because I know that you have so much devotion for them and just their legacy and keeping it alive and well.
Thank you so much. It's the Commemorative Air Force that got me into this. I was one of many, many Americans who didn't even know that that program existed. I grew up not hearing anything about it. When I came to the unit, I knew they had a World War II airplane, and I wanted to fly one. So I found them, joined the unit, and it's like, well, by the way, this new thing about our plane. And so that's how I got introduced to it. And so it's just one thing led to another, and the story fascinates me. The conversion of some historical narrative or the dates and things that we get in school to actual human stories about actual human people that did things. And finding that so many of those human stories were right here in our own hometown and in our state. And there are those stories in every state. So finding that story, finding your personal connection, makes it more than just flying cool airplanes. It's so much more than that. It's understanding the complexity of our own history and then carrying that complexity forward and continuing that legend. So thank you very much for that.
I'm going to build upon that for a little bit. That's great, Danielle. But our kind of latent definition of success is to have both of you in that going to an event and I hand you iced teas right after you land, right? So that's the thing. We're on, if you're a software person, we're on version 7.0 of Warbird pilots. Right, so we want to try and pass on as much as we can. And then, when both of you fly this, you're probably going to have like B. Haidu looking down on you, taking care of things. So other questions? I think maybe we had one all the way up at the top.
Yes, Pete Washburn, Windy City Soaring. I was curious, how does the PT handle crosswinds? And as a follow-on, what's your flap configuration for breezy crosswinds?
John, go ahead.
That's actually a great question. So flaps up landing are the thing to do in a strong crosswind. So, and a wheel landing, I would add, okay? Wheel landing with the flaps up work very well. And it actually does really well in the crosswind. So even a strong crosswind will do quite well. So,
I think the other thing, if it is gusting to 23, probably stay in the FBO and drink some coffee, right? Because it's usually gusting to 23. It's always like gusting to 28
and
stuff.
Kind of remember, it is a museum piece. You want to use some discretion on when you go fly. So that's true.
No, that's a great question. It's a bit of a workout, but grass runways always help too. Yeah. So, other questions, commentary, narrative? We got somebody kind of up here in the back.
If you could stay speak.
Okay. From a maintenance perspective, I was curious about any special procedures to maintain the wooden wings, especially through the seasons in Ohio.
Yeah, so the biggest thing is we borescope. There's several holes down through the lower portion of the wing, and we take a lot of care looking for cracks and delamination. And we're fortunate with this airplane. It was restored in the 80s, and we just pay a lot of attention to it, but we try to keep it inside. If it's raining, we're not going to go fly. So like Danielle said, it is a museum piece and we have to treat it like that.
So if you have any good woodworking skills or building pianos, we'd like to talk to you because that's kind of what this airplane's made about. Other kind of questions, commentary?
You're going to have one from down.
Got one all the way down there. We did have Jim Gorman, who was a World War II veteran. He flew C-47s, then flew Mustangs. And I flew up. It's actually on the Jumbotron, like the picture of me and Jim. And I said, hey, Jim, well, you flew PTs to start in Missouri. What can you tell me about PTs? And he just sat there and just thought for like about a minute. And he looked at me and he said, be careful. I was like, okay, I can roll with that. He was a wonderful man. Go ahead, next question.
Okay, this question is for Dave and John. You guys fly aircraft that are very fast on a regular basis.
Go ahead, let's start that over.
I said Dave and John fly aircraft on a regular basis that have a lot of speed. And now you have the opportunity to fly the PT that is quite slow. Was there kind of a big learning curve in going from something fast all the time to something that's a little slower?
Well, I'll go on that one. It's really not the speed. For me in this airplane, it's very heavy. This airplane weighs 2,700 pounds loaded, and it only has 200 horsepower. So it's very tricky, and you plan everything, your departure. One thing that we talked about, when you plan across country, I plan it from airport to airport. And we're blessed in this country to have an airport every 20 miles, it seems like. But just in case something happens, you've got a place to set it back down. So
I'm going to build upon that a little bit, okay? Because when I'm in the UK or in the US, I always try and talk to Warbird pilots, right? Because they always have some interesting insights on this. And, two things I can kind of offer up. One is, anybody here like the Pure Leaf iced tea? Love that stuff, right? There we go, right there. That's like the official CAF Buckeye Wing drink. That and Oreos, right? You have to have Oreos, right? But, it doesn't go that fast. So it's good to take a Pure Leaf iced tea and freeze it in the freezer, right? And then by the time you get to where you're going, it's unfrozen and you can do this. I think the other thing is you get a little bit older, for those of us, have to go to the bathroom and whatnot. There's a colleague of ours has a museum south of where we are, and Tim told me he only flies on like one tank. He says, because that's about as far as I can go before I have to go to the bathroom, right? So he doesn't even like swap tanks, right? He's left tank the whole way and then he like stops, so. Yeah. Go ahead, Danielle.
For folks who get into aviation because you love flying, this is the kind of flying we love to do. It's low, it's slow, you feel it, you can smell the air. You're not in a hurry to get anywhere, you're not going to get anywhere in a hurry. But it's a pleasure to just fly, to be off the ground. This is what drew me to the unit. I love ultralights, powered parachutes, helicopters, because you're low in the world playing. When I was working on my airplane single-engine land for regular fixed-wing aircraft, my instructor kept asking me if I was afraid of heights, because I'd set a cruise altitude about 2,500 feet. He's like, no, we can go higher. I was like, why would we? It's so much cooler down low. That whole flying down low, being connected to the air, connected to the land, it's not about the destination, it's about that journey.
So one of the things we're going to ask at the end of this, right, is if you can, go seek out a veteran, go seek out somebody that knows old airplanes, and just ask them, right, about their experiences with this. I could tell, I've been to Andrews Air Force Base a number of times for their big show, and I can always tell the veterans that like flew these planes, because they're not up at the fence saying, well, John Wayne flew that in Flying Tigers. Well, no, he didn't, right? They always stand like 20, 30 feet back, and they just look. And I was fortunate, one of the times I was Andrews, there was an older woman that was looking at our Mustang, and I walked out to her and I said, you used to fly these things, right? And she goes, yeah, I was a North American delivery pilot for P-51. She had like 650 hours in Mustangs. And I got my little book and I said, you just keep talking, right? And we're just gonna go take notes. But that's kind of the takeaway and the mission that you could help us out with, is really to start to get that organic domain knowledge around flying this. And I'll leave you with one kind of funny story. I don't think he's here this weekend, but Kurt Volker is a Warbird pilot that he does acro stuff and all this, but he's flown the E, the F, and the G models of the ME-109. And he was telling me a story with Oscar Besch, who was a Luftwaffe ace he was talking to. And he said, Oscar, tell me about flying the 109. He goes, well, this is true of like every airplane. He literally grabbed Kurt's hand and said, imagine you're sliding a glass of wine across a table to a friend. That's how smooth you should be with the throttle inputs in the 109. So it's kind of like every time I take this off, I'm just thinking of Oscar sliding that wine glass across the table. And so fortunately, number of takeoffs equal number of landings. So Dave, any kind of closing comments as we start to wrap up here?
No, I just welcome you all to join the CAF, find a local unit. It's like they all said, I've known all these people at our airport, but I never truly knew them until we started our CAF unit. It's been a great experience.
Danielle?
Go find kids Share your excitement. You're here because you love flying, you love old planes. Share that with kids. Show them there's a way. All the pilots in the room, in the audience, you found a way, but there are lots of other kids out there who don't know the way. Show them a way. Help them out.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for being here, number one. And, I'm happy to be here, and I'm smiling every day just because I can be here. I would love to share that with everybody else, too. So pass it on is what I say. Yeah.
So I'll kind of close this out with two things. One, we're going to be around here afterwards if you want to come and kind of talk more and look around the PT and whatnot. But, I think all of us here, including myself, especially me because I'm just an IT guy, but we all started out with the model planes, right? I had the Cox PT-19 U-Control, which now would cost me like $250, right, if I got one. I get dizzy from like doing that. And, even there's just a lot of people that kind of understand, like I said, that domain knowledge. And so anything that you can do to help preserve that, by all means. But again, we want to thank the EAA, Warbirds of America, especially Connie Bolin, because I've got a Buckeye Wing coffee cup for her when she comes by, so I got to do that, right? And also Scotts. So if you make it down to Marysville, the grass runway is easily mistaken for a golf fairway. It's so smooth. It made all my landings good, right? It's just like so nice. So anyway, thanks again. Appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of the day. Take care.